So we're here with part two of the volunteer movement in World War One, and Scott's going to tell us about this part of the exhibit here. Scott?
We have another group of material over here from other Americans that volunteered to serve before America declared war in April of 1917. And there's a variety of reasons people did this. People did it for loyalty to France. People did it because they thought it was a great outrage. Another issue that became a rallying cry for the effort against Germany was the Lusitania, which of course was sunk by German submarine, and many lives were lost on that. And it became a real rallying cry. You can see we have a poster about it. And it's actually an enlistment poster. So it's using the Lusitania to get people to enlist in the British Army. We have a pennant from the Lusitania itself, and we have a commemorative painting, a reverse glass painting of the Lusitania.
Oh, incredible.
This was actually something that was published in a newspaper where Germans were actually warning Americans not to travel on ships that may be carrying war supplies. So they knew civilians were on those ships, and they torpedoed them anyway. I mentioned earlier that the Foreign Legion was one of the earliest places for Americans to join. The American Ambulance Hospital in Paris had been around since the 1870s. It was created by wealthy Americans to benefit sort of the expat community living in Paris, to give them high quality medical care, hospital services, doctor services. And so it was a natural point for Americans to gather after the declaration of war in 1914-15. And this gentleman right here was one of the early ones to get involved. He was actually a Yale student, and he was part of what's called the Paris Squad of the American Ambulance Hospital. Their main job was to evacuate wounded soldiers that would be brought into Paris via rail trains by the thousands. And they would then take these wounded soldiers to a variety of hospitals, depending on what their injury was, whether there was a sickness, whether it was a physical injury. They would sort them in the train station, and then the ambulances would bring them to various hospitals in Paris. So that's what his job was. This gentleman is a very significant person. This grouping from here to here is from a person called Piatt Andrew.
Oh, yes.
He was
Gloucester, Mass.
He was Gloucester, Massachusetts. Yeah. He was actually the founder of the American Field Service. He went over to France in the closing days of 1914 and joined as a driver with the American Ambulance Field Service. He then became the Inspector General of the American Ambulance Field Service. In 1916, due to arguments about funding and where resources were going, Andrew broke off the field service and formed an independent organization that was separate from the American Ambulance Hospital. And you can see we have his uniform here. We have a couple of his hats. We have one of his photo albums. This photo actually shows him behind the wheel or behind the camera, posing next to his ambulance in 1915.
Oh, okay.
So that's what he's still a driver. Here we have his medals. We actually have a letter from General Pershing to him, and we have a variety of other insignia items that he had. But he's a very influential man. Actually, a lot of people don't know this. He was actually a closeted gay man.
Yes.
And he was extremely well connected in Boston society. He was assistant director of the U.S. Mint. He ran successfully for Congress. He was really, really successful man. And amazing achievement. The entire American ambulance service was based on the design that he set up for the field service. So when the Americans came over, they used his existing design to carry through. Yes.
Wow, amazing.
The American Field Service had a couple of different competitors, most notably the Norton Hargis Ambulance Service. And that's what this gentleman was in. It was run by Richard Norton, who was a Harvard professor and archaeologist. And he created an ambulance unit in the early days of the war and ended up merging with Herman Hargis. Herman Hargis was a very prominent banker of the time. He had created an ambulance service, but didn't necessarily want to get involved with the day-to-day operations after about 6 months.
Okay.
So the two merged. Norton takes over the whole thing and expands it. And this particular uniform was worn by a gentleman named William Ingeman, who became a fairly well-known architect from Minnesota. You can see his uniform has blue tabs, whereas the other field service uniforms will have buff tabs, usually with red. You can also see that in addition to his Norton Harges hats, he has an aviation hat. He became a pilot, and he was attached to the 3rd Air Park, which was a plane ferrying force.
Okay.
And you can see that side cap with that 3rd Air Park insignia was something he wore later. Next one we're going to talk about is it's tied to the field service in a way that's a little unusual.
Mm-hmm.
This gentleman served in American Field Service as a driver. And when America declared war, the U.S. Army decided to take over all the volunteer ambulance units.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a request, they were taking them over. And the choice was, as a driver, you either sign on board with us here and enlist as a private in the Army, or we're going to basically send you home and make sure you can't hang around Paris. You're going to be sent home and you'll be drafted as soon as you get back. So there was a loophole. A lot of these guys didn't like the way they were being treated and talked to. They had been there for some cases several years doing this.
Right.
So there was a loophole. And the French needed men that could handle the difficult calculations of an artillery officer. Calculating for barometric pressure, distance, elevation. It was not something that the average person was necessarily going to be able to do. So they were looking for American college students to do that. So after he was in the American Field Service, he joined the French artillery. And the way they skirted laws of Americans being combatants is they joined the Foreign Legion. And as members of the Foreign Legion, they were immediately sent over to artillery to be officers. So they weren't sent into the Legion proper, but they were covered by the Legion. So there's nothing that the American government could do. They had to accept that. So that's why he's a French artillery.
Okay, so technically, this gentleman, he's a Foreign Legion officer, but he's serving in a French Army unit.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. He was never in one of the marching regiments. It was, and you'll see with the aviation service, they did the same thing there.
Okay.
But this gentleman was also of note that after the war, he became the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, where he was from, and a man of note. He knew FDR, and if you look at the photographs that we have of him, this one in particular, you can see that Thomas McAllister is wearing the exact uniform that we have on display.
Look at that.
We have his medals, we have his certificates. You can see over there, there's actually that group photograph is a class of all Americans who are going through the French Artillery School. And to the right is his American Field Service certificate from when he was an ambulance driver. So there weren't too many of these guys. There were somewhere probably around 100 of them that were American, that were in the field artillery as officers. Okay. Most of them started off as sub-lieutenant, and then they would make rank as they performed. He was actually decorated with the Croix de Guerre for service as an artillery officer, and he also received the Legion of Honor later on.
Incredible. Yeah.
Now, I mentioned the Foreign Legion being a way to skirt American laws about being combatants. The other group that used that was, of course, the Lafayette Escadrille, and the Lafayette Flying Corps, which is the next grouping we're going to be looking at here, right? This gentleman's name was David Judd, and he was a pilot in SPAD 3, which that's the squadron. That's a really famous squadron because Guy Namir was in SPAD 3. Guy Namir, of course, being the most successful of all French pilots.
Right.
The uniform is a classic, a blue uniform. There are a variety of shades they would wear. The collar insignia, the winged stars. And if you look very closely on the uniform, you'll see something that's you don't see this very often, but you do see it. If you look at the buttons, you'll actually see they say Légion étrangère for Foreign Legion.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, look at that.
Now, there are other buttons they could wear too. A wing propeller button was a normal one. Sometimes they also wore flaming bomb buttons. But they had the option, because they were legionnaires, they could actually wear not only the buttons of the Legion, but they could also wear the color of the Legion. And at that point, the color of the Legion was a drab moutarde, which is an olive drab.
Okay. Yep.
But you see here, we also have his Lafayette Flying Corps certificate. We have a picture of him in uniform, and his American Field Service Medal, because he started off there. Like so, you see a lot of overlap where people go from one service to the other. A lot of people that were in aviation started off as ambulance drivers or as legionnaires. Some of the most famous ones were in the Foreign Legion that were members of the Lafayette Escadrille. So, like I said, the American volunteer movement is something that I find really fascinating. The stories are quite varied. A lot of the documentation is quite good because a lot of these guys were Harvard and Yale and Princeton.
Yes.
So you'll see not only the documents that we have from their groupings, but they were written up about in newspapers and college periodicals. So you can really get an amazing group of information about these guys. But really, really important. These guys served in very small numbers. Their impact was to get a neutral America who craved neutrality and did not want to get involved with what they called the European War.
Right.
This gave them a reason to want to get involved, to see that this was a cause greater than them, and that it's something that we should get involved, should be involved with. And of course, we have a track record ever since then of being involved in pretty much everything else in the world, where people are in harm, or in harm's way.
Right, exactly. Wow, but just what an amazing collection you've got here, Scott. Like, as you said, like very few Americans served in these units or served in this manner, and we've got a lot of their not just their uniforms, but like their medals and paperwork and everything, documentation, like incredible work here.
Some of these groups, we've got letters, we've got diaries, we have photo albums, scrapbooks. And the numbers of these guys is very small. I mean, the total size of the Lafayette Flying Corps and Escadrille combined was about 280 men. Of those 280 men, if you take out the ones that washed out, or killed during training, or who transferred out of the service before they got assigned to a squadron, you're talking about only about 180 pilots. Americans in the French Foreign Legion, you're talking just over 100. That's all. Americans in the ambulance service, a little bit of a different story. American Field Service fielded somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 men from when it was part of the American Ambulance through its federalization. Norton Hargis, we're not really sure of the numbers on that. The founder died right before the war ended. So they were in a little bit of disarray at the end. So things weren't documented as well as they were in the field service. We think there are somewhere north of 1,000 men that were involved from its inception till it was federalized. The men involved with the British and Canadian armies will never know, because many of them enlisted under aliases, but it was in the tens of thousands. So, but yeah, something that I find no end to fascination with.
Oh my God, same here. This is fascinating. Like what stories? And then like these aren't just not to denigrate, but like these are educated men. And I mean, this gentleman here goes on to become the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. I mean, it's like, wow, these are like people of note, and then they go on and like they continue their service.
People, in many cases, these people they were people of privilege. Some of them were not. I mean, we met a couple guys over there in the Canadian forces that were not men of privilege. But with the ambulance service and with some of the flight service, many of these people were wealthy. They had family money. They had family businesses. They didn't have to risk their lives for people that they didn't know in a country across an ocean. But they felt that it was a calling that was very chivalrous. Plus, many of these men were very young, and they were looking for a little bit of adventure too. And some of them got over there and found out that that's not where they wanted to be. We had mentioned very briefly the helmet and the medals for the American Volunteer and the Foreign Legion. He got over there, and he, within a matter of weeks, thought, what did I do? How do I get out of this?
Oh, wow.
And so he feigned going crazy. And he took off his clothes, and he started running around naked, screaming. So they came and they grabbed him up,
Right.
and they brought him back to an aid station. In the meantime, another American gets a small shrapnel wound, so he's going to walk back to the aid station because you have to get wounds dressed. You cannot ignore them.
Right.
It's a court-martial offense if you don't get wounds treated. So he's in there, and it turns out he ends up in the same tent. So he looks over, and this guy is, shaking and doing whatever he's doing to pretend that he's no longer mentally well.
Right.
Well, the doctor leaves the room, and all of a sudden he looks at the other guy and he goes, "Psst, I'm getting out of here. I've had enough of this stuff." And so the other Legionnaire looks at this and says, what a jerk. I mean, he didn't say it, but he's like, okay, whatever. Well, the French are smarter than this guy is, and they figure out that he's faking.
Right.
So he not only is not discharged, but he's sent to a penal regiment for a year. And after a year, they return him back to the Foreign Legion.
Whoa.
Now he pulls the same nonsense again. But now the American Volunteer movement is being written up on the front page of the New York Times and all kinds of periodicals. The French don't want to start court-martialing American volunteers. So they had him pack his stuff up. They brought him to the port and said, "See you later."
Yeah.
And they got rid of him. But so not everybody was a hero.
Right. Yeah, people are going to be people. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And of course he came home and he had self-awarded himself a Croix de Guerre and told everybody what a big hero he was.
Right.
Just to complete the image of a total dirtbag.
Wow, incredible story, Scott. This is amazing. Yeah, folks, New Ipswich Museum of History and Bay State Militaria Facebook page. So these are going to be shared, obviously, on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll link out to everything for Scott's page.
We do photo essays on some of these artifact groupings. We have more that are not on display, and the important thing is we just want to get the stories out and let people enjoy them.
Absolutely, Scott.
Thank you.
This has been awesome.
Yes,
absolutely.
For me too.
Super cool.